This is Romans 9, starting at verse 1. This is the Message translation. Now, normally I like to really do a good study of a book like this, you really should use multiple translations, and I try to do that as much as I can to bring out the full flavor. I didn't on this one. I stayed completely with the Message, so if you do want to stop and pause and look at it in another translation, we can. I do think, however, I don't always agree with Peterson. I mean, because sometimes there will be several ways to look at a passage, and he'll take one and blow it up, but then you miss all the others. Okay, so there is a downside to looking at something like this, but he does a great job. It is so very poetic the way he says it, and he does a pretty good job of giving you the idea. In this case, it's really not necessary a lot because the idea is the same in whatever translation, but the way he describes it really hits home to an American audience. He does a good job of giving you the gist of what Paul is trying to communicate here. Okay? All right. At the same time, you need to know that I carry with me at all times a huge sorrow. It's an enormous pain deep within me, and I'm never free of it. I'm not exaggerating. Christ and the Holy Spirit are my witnesses. Okay, so he's saying right now, I mean it, you guys. I'm going to tell you something. It really bothers me, and I swear before Jesus is standing right here. God is right here as my witness. I am telling you the truth. I want you to believe me. I honestly mean this. Okay? And then he goes on. It's the Israelites. If there were any way I could be cursed by the Messiah so they could be blessed by him, I'd do it in a minute. What are you saying? Are you serious? You would really trade your salvation. You would trade and go to hell. You would trade your salvation so that Israel could be saved.
Sounds like what Jesus said.
Yeah. Paul reveals here he's a way better Christian than I am. Okay, I mean, I wouldn't trade it for nothing. Okay, but I mean, he would say that, and it's like, whoa, are you serious? That's saying a lot. I mean, okay, if there's a contest, you won. All right, it's like in terms of wow, that's saying a lot. You're serious. You with God standing right here, you're going to make that statement that you care that much about Israel. Okay. They're my family. I grew up with them. They had everything going for them. Family, glory, covenants, revelation, worship, promise, to say nothing of being the race that produced the Messiah, the Christ, who is God over everything always. Oh, yes. Now, why does he feel so strongly? Now, think about it. From a human perspective, Paul was the most educated of all of the apostles. Okay. He was. He had the equivalent of a doctorate. Okay, that's a Pharisee. I mean, he was very brilliant. He knew the scriptures backward and forward. He knew the prophecies in the Old Testament that predicted the Messiah and what the Messiah would be like. And early in his ministry, his assumption was, I'm going to the Jews because I'm a Pharisee, man. I mean, it doesn't get any higher than that. All right, of course they're going to listen to me. I'm a Pharisee. Hello, I mean, is there and which of the apostles, which of the other disciples of Christ has those kind of credentials? Nobody did. So the assumption being, I'm the guy. And so when Paul, left Jerusalem and when he basically bounced around, he would go to Gentile cities and he always went to the synagogues and preached to the Jews there. The idea being, I'm God's man to the Jews. But it wasn't very fruitful.
Wasn't he too one of the
Gamaliel. Yeah, he was a student of Gamaliel. Yes. Gamaliel, even to this day in Judaism, his writings are revered as one of the great fathers of Judaism. Okay, and that was his mentor. Okay, Gamaliel is even mentioned in the book of Acts when they wanted to kill Peter and those guys, and Gamaliel says, hey, there was this one guy, Judas or something or other, who led a people thinking that he was somebody and led some kind of revolution. And guess what? Nothing happened. He died. His disciples scattered. And nothing came of it. He says, but look, let's let these guys alone. If this is of God, you're going to be fighting against God, and if it's not, it'll go away on its own. Okay, and then they decided to let the disciples go because of Gamaliel. So Gamaliel was a very influential character and continues to be influential in Judaism today. And Paul was a direct disciple of his. And so again, he looked like he was the perfect guy to spread Christianity to the Jews. He knew the Old Testament scriptures backwards and forwards, and that's what he was doing. He would go to those synagogues and reason from the scriptures that the Messiah had to come and pay for the sins, not just of Israel, but for the world. And the Old Testament is full of those kinds of scriptures, that the Son of Man would come for the salvation of the world. And it didn't work out that way. And so again, Paul's, but God had other plans for him. So he ended up doing something that he wasn't an expert in. He picked an area that it wasn't even his minor in college. Okay, he's working on something that has nothing to do with his expertise. But that's where God used him with the Gentiles. Okay, but his heart was to reach the Jews. Don't suppose for a moment, though, that God's word has malfunctioned in some way or other. The problem goes back a long way. Now, what problem is he talking about? Why aren't the Jews getting it? Most of the prophets, I was going to say all, but no, most of the prophets were Jewish. The Messiah was Jewish. The scriptures are written by Jews. So why aren't the Jews getting saved? And that's what he's saying. This is like, it's like, what is going on here? Did it malfunction? Look at all these promises for eternal life and salvation come through the Jews. Shouldn't it be for the Jews? And boing, it's bouncing off them. What happened? Here he gets ready to explain it. From the outset, not all Israelites of the flesh were Israelites of the Spirit. It wasn't Abraham's sperm that gave identity here, but God's promise. Remember how it was put, your family will be defined by Isaac. That means that Israelite identity was never racially determined by sexual transmission, but it was God determined by promise. Remember that promise. When I come back next year at this time, Sarah will have a son. Now remember when God said that? Remember when Abraham was in his tent and he had a little barbecue for the angels there? And one of the angels was, like the Son of Man, so probably the pre-incarnate Jesus. And so there he is, God's right there, and then he says, when I come back, Sarah's gonna have a son. Remember what happened what happens in the next scene? Sarah laughs. That's how he got the name Isaac, which means laughter, because Sarah laughed at that. She said, I'm 9 years old. Seriously? Who is this guy? He must have just come from the bar, because that's not going to happen. Right? Sarah will have a son. That's not the only time. To Rebekah, also a promise that took priority over genetics. When she became pregnant by our one-of-a-kind ancestor Isaac, and her babies were still innocent in the womb, incapable of good or bad, she received a special assurance from God. What God did in this case made it perfectly plain that his purpose is not a hit or miss thing dependent on what we do or don't do, but a sure thing determined by his decision, flowing steadily from his initiative. God told Rebekah, the firstborn of your twins will take second place. Later it was turned into a stark epigram. I loved Jacob, I hated Esau. Now Esau was a child of Abraham, a child of Isaac, but not a child of the promise. It was Jacob to whom the promise was given. Okay? Yeah.
In the term when it talks about hated, I know like in older translations it'll say despised.
Yeah.
Was that because of Jacob's disregard for God? That was.
Well, yeah, God, although God said these things before he was born. Remember, God is outside of time, so he looked down and he saw the type of decisions and person that Esau became, and so I would say yes. I would say yes. And what was Esau's mindset? Well, Esau was very immediate gratification oriented. Okay, remember the classic scene that defines Esau was Esau comes home from a hunting trip. He's starving, and Isaac has prepared some stew, and it's done. It's ready to eat. And Esau goes up, give me some of that stew. And Isaac's like, no, it's not going to happen. Get your own food. I made this for me and maybe my parents or whatever, but you aren't invited. And Esau goes, no, I want some. No. He says, well, what do you want? And he says, and so I'll give you anything. I'm starving. I'm going to die if I don't get anything to eat. I'm hungry right now. It's okay. Sell me your birthright. Now, the birthright, since Jacob and Esau were little, Isaac has been telling them, we got a promise from God here that there's going to be a great nation coming out of you guys. I mean, you're the offspring of Abraham, and there was a promise that you guys are going to be blessed by God, and all that stuff. And as the firstborn, Esau, that inheritance falls to him. That this promise of God's going to use you to be that great nation and so forth, and you'll be blessed by God. And he's like, I don't care about that junk. It's like, seriously. I mean, what do I care? I don't need. People have kids and everything. You don't need God. All right. I don't care about being the firstborn. I don't care about that stuff. I don't care about that special blessing. I don't care about that. I didn't get any visitation from God. All I want right now, I want some stew. And he sold it for that. And that's the mindset of, you know what? I don't care about future things. I care about right now. That takes precedence. All right. Are you familiar with the Stanford marshmallow experiment? All right. Stanford marshmallow experiments took place, I believe, early 70s, maybe late 60s. I forgot. I think Marshall was the principal investigator. I'm not sure. Going on my faulty memory here. But basically, what they did was looked at several hundred young children between 4 and 5 years old, and they were brought into a room with a psychologist, and the psychologist says, would you like 1 marshmallow or 2 marshmallows? Now, none of these kids had breakfast. Okay, so he took the marshmallow and set it down. Boom. Would you like 1 marshmallow or 2? And for some reason, all the kids said, 2 marshmallows, please. So, okay, tell you what. I'm going to go out for a bit. And when I come back, I'll bring that second marshmallow. And if you're able to wait until I get back with that second marshmallow, then you'll have 2. But you got to wait, okay? Sure, sir. Goes outside, cameras are rolling, and a lot of those kids could not wait. As soon as it's about there, gone. All right, they just out of sight, out of mind, literally gone. Some of them, they looked at that thing and they just, and you could see the wheels turning. Now, some of them, they couldn't take it. They just gone after a while. And some of the children, they occupied themselves, they sang, they did other things, and they waited. Now, what they did was follow these children to see whether they were able to wait, how does that affect them later in life? Or did that seem to make any difference later in life? Or was it random? And so they followed the kids for 5, 10, 15, 20, 25, 30, 35, 40, 45, 50 years throughout their life, okay? Because that was a long time ago. And they kept following up every few years. And they looked at, what were your SAT scores? Did you go to college? Did you go to jail? Were you able to stay married? Were you able to succeed in, what was your success rate and so forth? And what they found was that the kids that could wait, the first thing they discovered was that it made a bigger impact on their college SAT scores than their IQs did at the time. Okay? So their IQ at 4 or 5 did not predict their IQ scores as well as whether they could wait or not. And then all those parameters that I just mentioned, all the good things, were much more likely in the kids that had that ability to wait. Now that has to do with something called I don't want to get too much into neurobiology. The point here is that faith is about, in part, faith is about the ability to do delayed gratification. Okay? Now, we're all judged differently because we have different genetics and backgrounds. And so only God, when it comes to how well you are doing, that's between you and God, because some people are genetically predisposed to have more trouble with immediate gratification. So ultimately, it comes down to how well could you have done based on how well you did. That's between us and God. So we can't judge each other based on that, but God does. And when it comes to spiritual things, anyone who comes to Christ ultimately has to deal with this subject. Okay? Do I go? There's a lot of immediate sin gratification things that as a Christian we say, no, I'm going to fight this. I'm going to fight this because I want something better. I want a relationship with God that's less full of guilt, that's less full of shame. I prefer that to immediate reward. And sometimes we fail. But that's what salvation, we got to take it out of that. But our goal is to do better in this area, okay?
How much do you think it had to do with parenting?
Well, that's where the developmental stuff comes in, and I don't want to. That's why I said, if you're that's under developmental influence, and so if you have parents that don't discipline and so forth, then you get a handicap, okay? Because the anterior prefrontal cortex doesn't develop as well, and that's why I said. But how well you do in immediate gratification, do never compare yourself to other people, because not everybody's temptations are the same. Okay, and that's between you and God. The question is there some there though? Is there some? The willingness to receive Jesus, the willingness to come to God on His terms and say, I don't want this junk in my life. I don't want to be dealing with substances and habits and problems like this. I want to want the right things. Okay, and that's the important thing. Esau never demonstrated that he wanted to want the right things. We have no evidence of that. He wanted immediate gratification, and he wasn't interested in change. Okay. Now, had he said, I don't want to be such a hog. I don't want to do that. I think things would have been differently. But he was happy where he was. He was happy, trading away the things of the spirit for the things of the flesh. Okay. All right. Is that grounds for complaining that God is unfair? And this is an issue. It's like, okay, because people look at that and going, wow, you said Jacob I loved, Esau I hated. Before Esau had done anything. And historically, people have looked at that and said, well, if that's how people are selected for the kingdom of God, that seems terribly unfair. Okay? So you're telling me I'm saved because I had no choice, because God loved me in the womb and just selected me, and yet my brother, he didn't get picked, and so that's just too bad. It's just arbitrary. That does seem unfair. Now, one thing, and I'm going to mention here, is that I'll be very careful with that, because we judge as though we were like a parent looking at two little babies. Now, as a parent, if you decide to like one over the other, and it's not based on anything those babies have done, that would be unfair. But the difference between us and God is that God is outside of time. When He looks at our life, He sees the whole thing from beginning to end. He sees every choice we've ever made. He knows that. He's not ignorant of that. And so you really can't put Him on that standard. You can't say, oh, arbitrary. Is it arbitrary? That doesn't, just because He decided before you were born doesn't mean it was arbitrary because of His reference point. Do you understand that? Okay. Now, Paul has an opportunity to explain that, but he doesn't. He goes on and says, okay, all right, that what I said is valid, but Paul looks at it from a different way. He says, okay, you're calling God unfair. Let's step back. Let's look at this way. And here's what he does. Not so fast, please. God told Moses, I am in charge of mercy. I am in charge of compassion. Compassion doesn't originate in our bleeding hearts or moral sweat, but in God's mercy. The same point was made when God said to Pharaoh, I picked you as a bit player in this drama of my salvation power. All we're saying is that God has the first word, initiating the action in which we will play our part for good or ill. Okay, so God saying, I will have mercy on whom I have mercy, and I will, some people, like with Pharaoh, for example, I chose Pharaoh to make a point and hardened his heart, and saying that God initiated both of those things. Well, what about Pharaoh? Was that unfair to Pharaoh that God hardened his heart when he cursed the Israelites and ended up going through that whole, experiencing all those curses on Egypt? Who elevated Pharaoh to be Pharaoh in the first place? Rulers are, that has to be approved by God, and so he was given that authority, he was given that position just by God to start with. But again, God knew his heart, he knew what he would do, and so there is a saying, when it comes to experiencing God's grace and salvation, if you choose against God, it's like this: First you will not, then you cannot. Imagine, that verse in Revelation 3:20 where Jesus says, behold, I stand at the door and knock. If anyone hears my voice and opens the door, I will come into him. Okay. Now, imagine, those hotel double doors. You have adjoining rooms, and you have the door on one side and a door on the other. Okay, so Jesus is standing. He opens his door, and he's knocking on your door. So you have the option to open it up. Okay. Now, if you want to be on there and say, I hear it, but it's a God thing. I'll get to it one day. After a while, God steps back, boom, closes his door. Okay? First, you will not. Now you cannot. And I believe Pharaoh fell into that category. So he says, okay, I'll still use you. You're not going to open the door. I'll still use you. I can still use you, but as an example. And that's kind of the thing with Pharaoh here. Okay, and that's just the picture. Again, I don't believe God's decisions are arbitrary. And so that's why I'm going to include that in the model to help understand this. Because otherwise you might think, his decisions are arbitrary. I don't think they're ever arbitrary. Now he goes on and says, are you going to object? So how can God blame us for anything since he's in charge of everything? If the big decisions are already made, what say do we have in it? Okay? If you're a Christian because you had no choice, or if you're a non-Christian because you have no choice, it's like, are we just living out a drama that's already been predetermined? Who in the world do you think you are to second-guess God? Do you for one moment suppose any of us knows enough to call God into question? So instead of going down the route and explaining what I just said to you, that it's not arbitrary, God's outside of time, first you will not, then you cannot. Instead of going through all that, Paul says, you know what? What if? What if God decided, he's God? We are so far beneath his intellect that if he makes a decision, he says he's good, he's God, he's good. If you don't understand how he can be good and still do that, that's your problem. But he's God. Somehow, it'll be fair, even if you don't understand it. He's God. The universe is a very, very, very complicated place. I mean, human engineering we've achieved quite a bit, and our level of knowledge keeps going up. But even the most sophisticated machinery on the planet, even the most sophisticated algorithms and calculations are nothing compared to the one who created it. The intellect required to speak this world, this universe into existence and to keep us alive. I mean, there's no one person who can grasp even the entirety of one discipline of science. And he has it all. And that's important to keep in mind. All right, that before when you listen to these evangelical atheists, they have their rants going on. It's like and they claim science, and so it's I mean seriously, how many? I mean, you would need like 10,000 doctorates to even speak intelligently on this subject, and these people don't have anywhere near that. They're just plain arrogant. It's just plain arrogance. We're talking about God. You're going to judge God? Really? I mean, how much do you understand about the nature of your own reality?
Do you think that sometimes those evangelical atheists really have something driving at their heart, and that they're just angry at God?
Yeah, well, I don't think I've seen examples of them. I've had them as patients. I mean, what happens is this: what they will tell you if you're in a debate setting is that, it was scientific. I came to this through scientific inquiry and discovery. I was enlightened by science. That's why I'm no longer a Christian. No. What started it always was disappointment with the God of the Bible. You are disappointed because you thought that life would be easier. You thought that God would behave more like a genie. If you gave lip service to the God of the Bible, you expected more control. You thought you would get that income. You thought that you would get that man or that woman, and things didn't turn out. You didn't expect bad things to happen. Given the complexity of the universe, which absolutely screams an intelligent divine creator, okay, the millions of people who have near-death experiences, I mean, the more people how can you not know somebody that's had a near-death experience? You must not know anybody, because they're everywhere. They're everywhere. I mean, very rarely, when I ask somebody, have you had one, or do you know somebody who's had one, very rarely does somebody say no, and it's usually a young person. But if you made it to 40 and you haven't met anybody who's had one, that is very weird. That's strange. You must not talk to anybody, because they're everywhere. And they've been happening for thousands of years. That's why there are ghost stories going all the way back, because they're real, because their spirits are real. When you die, you pop out and all that stuff. People have been looking down and seeing their bodies for generations. We have a spirit. The evidence, there's a tidal wave of evidence that we have a spirit. How can we just have a natural universe and there be spirits? Think about that. How can you evolve from slime and be no God, and yet we have spirit? We have consciousness outside of our bodies. Okay? And the evidence is enormous that that is a fact. If you have a soul, there must be a God. Come on. I mean, you got complexity, you've got a soul. Those two together scream there has to be an intelligence behind this. There must be a conscious superintelligence. And we must somehow play a role in that in order for us to have consciousness. I mean, super consciousness, super intelligence outside of our physical bodies. Okay? So when somebody adopts this stupid idea, oh, God's not fair, so he doesn't exist. Really? What a baby you are. You're a baby.
Hubris to me.
Yeah, exactly. Yes, you are a 2-year-old throwing a tantrum. I don't like you. You're not my mommy anymore.
Oh my goodness.
Okay?
Yeah, those two guys from Campus Crusade, were they saved before they fell away? Or?
They had said the prayer to receive Christ into their lives, yeah. But not everybody who says, Jesus, come into my life. I mean, there's when you accept Christ, the question is always, was it Jesus or Genie that you accepted? And your next experiences will tell the tale. If it was Jesus, you'll still be hanging on to him years later, okay? If it was Genie, and you expected God to serve you, and you expected to understand everything and for life to be fair on your terms, then you're expecting God to serve you a little bit too much. And the Jesus that you accepted might not be the Jesus of the Bible, okay? Because as you travel forth in your Christian life, you get to see more and more of how Jesus treats you, okay?
It says not everyone that calls me Lord.
Precisely. Not everybody that calls me Lord, Lord is mine, okay? And only time will tell that, okay? All right, let's stop here as we reached our time limit, and we'll pick up there next time. Any questions on